What is up guys, Blue Spooky here. Just wanted to remind you guys to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you end up enjoying this video. That goes a long way to helping the videos do well and making sure I can continue making daily videos for a long time to come. If you guys have any thoughts about the stories in this video, please be sure to leave them in the comments below, as I love reading your guys' thoughts on the stories therein. Without further ado, I'll let you enjoy the next hour of true scary stories, and I'll see you guys again at the end of the video. Kids in my town used to swim at the local reservoir all the time, from early spring to early in the fall. It was on what we called the Old Airport Road, a deserted, forested stretch of dirt road that eventually led to a small airport in my area, hence the name. There was a rocky cliff area that some kids would be dared to jump off from, and sometimes my friends and I would have water balloon fights from the top of there, pelting the ones down below in the water. The water was always clean and pretty cold. It was overall just a pretty and quiet spot to enjoy your time in the water. It all changed one day, however, when the bodies were found. The story goes that a family from a neighboring town had gone to the reservoir after hearing about how nice it was, and decided to have a picnic and swim around for a while. For a little bit, everything was okay. The kids had gone around a bend in the reservoir, and the parents still heard the sounds of them playing, so they thought everything would be okay, and that they'd see them in just a minute. Then things suddenly went quiet. I mean real quiet too. The type where even the birds stop chirping in the trees because there's something dangerous nearby. The parents obviously grew concerned and went poking around the top of the rock ledges to check on their kids. 2 little boys, 7 and 5. That's when they found their boys poking at something with a big stick just on the water's edge. Something bloated, distended, purple, and wearing a bright red hoodie. It was the body of a young girl, just floating there in the reservoir. She looked pale, and her eyes were bulging from her head. Her parents yelled at them to get away from the body and come there right this minute. The family members were interviewed, which is how we know this, especially the accounts from the children. The K9 units were quickly dispatched as well. They combed through every inch of the surrounding reservoir, but the dogs couldn't pick up any scent other than this girl's. She was labeled a Jane Doe. No family or friends seemed to be looking for her, and the case went cold only a few months in. What little we do know is that she died of strangulation, not blunt head trauma like the family thought, and it's likely she had been sexually assaulted beforehand. Now, kids don't really go to that reservoir anymore, out of fear. Fear that we'll find another body just like that girl's. Fear they might become another casualty on the water for another family innocently enjoying the scenery to find. The killer is obviously still out there somewhere. Maybe he moved on. Maybe he decided to only kill once and that was enough for him. Maybe he's still out there, living a normal life along the Old Airport Road. I don't know if we're ever going to find out who did this. My friend, we'll call her Kay's family, was always more well-off than most, with enough disposable income to buy some very luxury items. New cars, the latest gadgets or technology, even a full party boat. It's that party boat and my first experience out on the water that I'd like to focus on today. That boat was a real nice one. Cherry red with a single sparkle in the paint, with a built-in sun cover and comfortable seats situated in a ring around the deck. Although it was relatively small, it was enough for a group of teens to go out on the local lake and party one night. Long story short, Kay had just gotten her driver's license. One night, she called me and a few of our friends and classmates up, got in the truck with the boat attached, and drove off while her parents were out of the house. Yeah, she basically stole that boat. Some hearing this will condemn those actions, and maybe some won't. I just felt it was an important thing to mention. The group consisted of Kay, myself, our friend Jake, and his older brother Clayton. Now, Clayton was 20 at the time, and in his sophomore year of college. The rest of us were all between 17 and 18. Kay had had a huge but silent crush on him for quite a while. We all knew he would probably never reciprocate her feelings, but that didn't stop her from trying or dropping hints constantly. I think inviting him to a stolen boat party out on a lake at night with underage drinking was definitely her biggest one. It took some finagling to set everything up and get the boat going in the water, as she'd only seen her dad do this once or twice. Once we did, Clayton took over driving, as he was the oldest and therefore the most responsible. I say that with a huge grain of salt, as he had just as much idea of how to drive a boat as the rest of us. We did a few circles on the lake. The wind was frigid as it whipped past us. Kay and I cuddled together for warmth, with Jake telling his brother to slow down a bit. We were obviously making a lot of noise. It was hard to hear anything, as the darkness around us slipped by, slick as oil. It was impossible to tell where the ground was in the darkness, where the sky ended and the water began. Clayton laughed, and I'm pretty sure he said something, but his voice was very muffled by the wind. He had already had a couple of cans of beer while we were fumbling setting up the boat too, so he wasn't in the clearest state of mind. Kay turned to me and whispered in my ear, "Hey, I'm gonna try to kiss him later." Her eyes were bright with drunkenness. She'd taken up on the beer already as well, after she saw him doing it. Most likely she wanted to impress him and show him how mature she was. I was going to tell her I didn't think that was a good idea. I mean, he was in college and it would be kind of weird, right? But I didn't even have time to finish that thought. There was a jolt and a shuddering scraping sound that vibrated the floor beneath our feet. Suddenly, we were launched from the boat into the cold, dark water. The boat had slammed hard into some rocks that were jutting out at a very high speed, and it had completely flipped over. I was flung out a fair bit, but I later learned the boat had collapsed right on top of Clayton. Kay had been launched right into one of the rocks and broke her arm, but still managed to crawl her way to safety, since she landed not far away from the shore. In hindsight, that's partially what made us crash in the first place. Jake was yelling, and I saw the faint outline of his back as he dove under to look for his brother. Each time he came up empty-handed. Dizzy, with my head fuzzing over from the impact, I swam over to help him look. I just remember him yelling over and over until his voice was completely strained. "Clay? Clay, can you hear me?" I dove under, groping at rocks and weeds and everything I could find until I had to come up for air. At the last second, my fingers brushed what I thought was the front of a shirt. Attached to an arm, attached to a body, I burst out of the water, screaming to Jake, "I got him! He's right here!" I dove back under. Together, we managed to get him to the shore where Kay was waiting, holding on to her broken arm. As she moved it around, I could tell it was flopping over in a way arms never should. Jake told us to call 911. He slapped his brother in the face, trying to get him to wake up. "How the fuck do you do CPR?" he said. "We can't," Kay blurted, wincing in pain. "I mean, we drank beer. I stole the boat." "Kay," I said. I took her face in my hands, forcing her to look at me. I could see the whites of her eyes. She was clearly crying. "We have to call. Come on." She nodded and grabbed me with her good arm. She cried as she dialed 911 in my arms. The police and ambulance came 15 minutes later. They took Clay away on a stretcher. Miraculously, he still had a faint pulse, but it was not looking good. Jake went with him in the ambulance while the cops drove me and Kay home. They lectured us on underage drinking and driving a boat recklessly. Kay's parents had gotten home earlier than expected, and they were waiting for Kay when she got back. When the cops explained to them what had happened, they didn't yell at Kay like I thought they were going to. Instead, they just hugged her and I tight and made us promise to never do something like that again. We were offered towels, a shower, and a change of clothes while waiting for my dad to pick me up. I felt numb and cold, even after a hot shower. Kay still cried beside me, begging Clayton to be okay. She really blamed herself for the whole thing. Although Clayton did live, he was never the same again. He had difficulty speaking and remembering things, and he couldn't really move without a walker or a wheelchair. His brain had been without oxygen too long to make a full recovery. Kay, Jake, and I visited him a lot these few months in the hospital, and although he couldn't remember our names sometimes, he wrote down on a piece of paper in his shaky handwriting that it was okay. He still lives with his parents and needs constant care. As for me, Jake, and Kay, we're doing all right. Last time I spoke with Kay, she went off to college in another state, where she could escape from that terrible night. Jake stayed in the area to help care for Clay, and he and I actually became a couple many years later. We now have a daughter together, and we've talked a lot about that night. We're going to make sure to educate her on boat safety, and how it's a very, very bad idea to go out on the water and not tell anyone where you're going. That it's exactly what happened to Uncle Clay. I really hope she listens to our advice. I'll start by saying that I'm deathly terrified of water. Any large, deep body of water, I refuse to go near it. Hell no. My wife finally convinced me to go to counseling after suffering through a lot of beach and pool trips with no swimming and not knowing why. That was part of the joke. She was actually really concerned about my well-being and why I wasn't opening up to her about it. When I finally did, she brought up counseling every day until I would go. My therapist recommended I journal my thoughts and open up to others about my fears so I could conquer them. After some soul-searching, I can trace my crushing fear of water to the old swim instructor I had when I was still in kindergarten. His name was Mark. He was in his early 20s from what I can remember, and was extremely fit. With the physique of someone who swam every day, he was extremely energetic with us kids, and unfortunately also very critical as well. He expected little 2 to 5 year olds swimming for the first time to jump right into the deep end, so to speak. He wanted us to be able to swim as well as he did after only a single lesson or two. My first lesson, the one my mom was present for, went about as well as you'd expect. He was very patient, nice, and helpful. He even guided me across the shallower parts of the lake and held me up as I tried and failed to kick. I forgot to mention, instead of traditional lessons at a swimming pool, Mark offered them over the summer at a lake in my town. The lake was so wide you could just barely see the other side over the horizon, and the water ranged from blue to a dark muddy black on most days. There was a dock and a little strip of beach that I could play on after my lesson was over. That was if my mom wasn't tired after working. Some parts of the lake bottom were very rocky though. I remember getting out of the water a lot to find small scrapes and cuts on my feet after stepping on a few sharp rocks. Mark didn't care though, at least not when we were alone. He would just tell me to go back in the water, sometimes even pushing me in, causing me to trip and get scraped up even more. The worst part though was when he made me swim out deeper than I was comfortable with. If I started to get scared, he would call me a wuss or a baby, and things like that. He would keep on pushing me until I made it to whatever arbitrary point he'd set for that lesson. I'd get so tired from all that swimming. My mom said I used to fall asleep in the car after every lesson and had to be carried inside because my legs and arms were too strained to move. Mark would also tell me scary stories too. Ones about monsters hiding at the bottom of the lake with teeth and claws that would snatch up kids who were bad at swimming or too slow to escape them. I hated it. Every time he made me go out deep, I would picture gnashing teeth grasping at my legs from below and trying to pull me under, just like he'd said. I cried whenever I couldn't feel anything below me or see anything in the dark water. I guess it all came to a head one day, and after this experience, I never had swimming lessons with Mark again. Or anyone for that matter. It was a cloudy day on a Wednesday, and I was dreading going out into the water when it would be most dark, almost an oily black. I really couldn't see anything, and I knew Mark was going to be mean about it. I don't really know why I didn't tell my mom about any of this. I guess I didn't want to disappoint her, since I was the one who begged to learn how to swim in the first place. Mark was waiting for me as usual, already in his swim shorts. As soon as I got out of the car, though, he immediately flashed me an angry look. He looked madder than I'd ever seen him before, and I could feel something drop in the pit of my stomach. Even back then, I knew something was wrong. I had on a neon pink swimsuit at the time with bright blue flowers, and Mark had noticed. He flatly, even with an intense look in his eyes, said, "You know, the fish people are gonna see that easily. Maybe you should take it off." My heart just about stopped. I had just covered safety in kindergarten that week and what to do and look out for if an adult in your life said something exactly like that. And boy, if that wasn't a get an adult you trust right away moment, I don't know what is. Just as quickly as the panic spiked, it settled though, when he said, "I'm just kidding, go take a lap." He put his hands up defensively, as if seeing the recognition in my eyes. The lake was really cold that day, and stretched on forever in that waving black expanse. I stepped out carefully on my shaking legs, wanting to get away from Mark, while also terrified about going out there. When I was about waist high, I started swimming. He usually made me go to the buoys separating the deeper parts of the lake from the shallow part, so I thought I could hang there for a minute with the excuse of catching my breath. He would be annoyed, of course, but since he couldn't reach me from the shore, I'd be okay. I turned out to not be okay. The buoys were an orange beacon as I bobbed through the water. My arms were already feeling heavy and tired, but I pushed on. I could feel Mark stare on me all the while, and though I didn't look back until I got to them, I knew he would either be angry or disappointed that I was already out of breath. I reached them and clung onto one for support. Since it was so cool out, my hands were already clammy from being out of the water, and goosebumps started to make their appearance on my body. Aside from the few birds that flew overhead, I felt completely alone out there. I nearly had a little heart attack when something splashed beside me and a hand grabbed my shoulder. In reflex, I let go of the orange buoy and sank below the surface. The hand went with me, but instead of letting me go, it held me down. The muddy water stung my eyes. I couldn't see which way was up or down. I thrashed and tried to get away from this hand. My chest hurt, and I couldn't take it anymore. I gasped for air. My mouth quickly filled up with lake water, and I screamed. Blood was rushing hard in my ears, and I couldn't even hear myself thinking. The hand tugged me up suddenly, holding my head out of the water before plunging me back down again. I didn't even get a chance to breathe in. The hand did this several more times. I can only remember a blur of water after that. I thought to myself, this is it. Mark said they'd come for me, the monsters, and they did. And then, suddenly I was back on the shore, coughing and retching, trying to fill my lungs as fast as possible. I heaved myself over onto my stomach, and water rushed out of my throat onto the ground. Mark was standing over me, grabbing my back and slapping it, making sure all the water came out. The grip felt familiar, and as I calmed down and looked up at Mark, I understood why. Instead of concern or worry crossing his face, he was laughing, not even trying to hide it. I knew then it was never the lake monsters that had dragged me under. "Come on, take it easy, kid," he said, reining in his mocking laughter. "I knew you needed some motivation, but that was pathetic. You nearly drowned." He did this to me, all to motivate me to swim better, or to scare me. As a literal kindergartner who just almost drowned, I couldn't find the words to express what I was feeling at that moment. All I could do was burst into tears and cry until my lesson was over. Mark brought me my towel and didn't speak to me until my mom pulled into the parking lot above the beach. He leaned in close, and I could still smell his breath to this day, like he'd eaten something spicy for lunch. He whispered in a low voice, "Don't tell anyone, or next time I won't pull you back up. Do you understand, kid?" I didn't say anything. I just nodded and went to the car. Mark waved to my mom and smiled as I got in. She asked me how my lesson went, and paused when I just said, "Good." She asked if I was okay, but I didn't say anything for a long while. I guess I was in shock after what just happened. Finally, I just said, "I hate swimming. I don't want to go anymore." And we never did. My mom pulled me out of those swimming lessons, and I never went to another trainer again. Hell, I didn't even touch the idea of swimming or going into any water after that. Even public pools in the gym or otherwise. I just kept seeing Mark's face after he pushed me under the water, or feeling his hand on the back of my head, feeling my lungs still burning whenever I looked at a body of water bigger than a puddle. I've had my wife look over this, and she thinks it's sad and really well written. She hugged me for a long time after I finished writing it, and I'll thank her forever for urging me to go to therapy. I'm not on a complete road to recovery yet, but I know I'll get there someday with her support. I don't know where Mark is now or if he's still teaching kids, but I hope he had his head held underwater at least once, just so he'd know how it feels. The saying, "blood is thicker than water," is a familiar one. It means your blood relatives or family unit should be your only loyalty, and giving them up for anything outside of it should be highly frowned upon. That being said, there's another phrase I can coin that means something more to me, associated with an event I'll never forget no matter how long I live. Blood is thicker than oil, both in the metaphorical and literal senses. It all started on the day my parents told me they were getting a divorce. We lived on a huge property by a lake at the time, in a huge log cabin-style house. They hosted parties every summer, with friends and neighbors out on the lake. There would be music, the smell of hot dogs and hamburgers on the grill, and the lake looming over the horizon, reflecting the firelight and whatever color of fireworks we chose that night. It was at one of those parties that my parents started acting really strange. They were usually on opposite schedules throughout the week, but on these weekend parties they reconnected, laughed, and danced with each other as if they were together 24/7. But that night they seemed to be on opposite sides every time I looked for them. Whenever I asked if they were going to dance tonight, my mom just straightened her mouth and didn't say anything. My dad would shrug and say he'd catch up with her later. At 13 years old, I knew something was off, but I couldn't think of anything to try and fix it. Different neighbors milled in and out of our house for water and snacks and to use the bathroom as the party went into the later hours. The breeze was still lukewarm, but eventually I had to go out to my room to get a jacket. Our house was very large, and my room was at the end of the hall at the right, on the side of the house that faced the lake. I passed a few people who smiled and waved as I went up the stairs, but aside from the top landing where the bathroom was, the upstairs was really quiet. I usually go inside once or twice to give myself a moment to breathe and decompress from these parties. I have sensory processing issues, and excessive chatter for too long makes me disassociate. That's definitely what I needed tonight. I was already feeling not all there from all the noise outside, and just needed 5 or 10 minutes. That's all. But 5 or 10 minutes was all it took for my life to change. I got to my room, shutting the door softly behind me, and taking a seat on my bed. I left the lights off because I felt particularly light-sensitive that day. I lay there in the dark for a few minutes, breathing and not thinking much about anything. The quiet felt like swallowing a spoonful of warm honey. It was really good and relaxing. My quiet moment was shattered, though, when I heard splashing through the open window. Not the regular kind of splashing either. frantic, desperate splashing that sounded like a little kid had fallen in or something. My trance broken, I raced to the window to look out. I still felt disconnected to my surroundings, but I was there enough to be able to see what was going on. I almost didn't want to believe it. Down there in the dim glow of the moonlight and light from the bonfire around the corner, I saw my dad. He was bent over waist deep, wrestling with something. At first, I thought he was play wrestling with his brother or playing chicken or something. He was childish like that even at 40. But I quickly realized that wasn't the case when a man I knew popped out of the water, trying to punch my dad and get ashore. But my dad snatched him back and tackled him back in, pinning his head under again. It was Mr. Welsh, our next-door neighbor, a man we'd had at those parties every weekend. He and his wife often babysat me when my parents went out to dinner. He repaired our plumbing when I flushed Legos down the toilet. Everything neighborly you could think of, and there my dad was trying to drown him right in front of me. Not that he knew I was there, but I think he would have done this even if my bedroom light was on. I watched as they continued to struggle. When Mr. Welsh didn't come up for a minute and his body stopped moving, I couldn't take it anymore. I ran downstairs out the front door. People stopped to talk to me, all smiling, but I ignored them and ran past. I turned the corner of the house. My dad was there coming out of the lake, but Mr. Welsh was nowhere to be found. I looked frantically out at the water, but I couldn't see him anywhere. My dad just looked at me. His shoulders sagged. I could swear something broke inside him. He collapsed to the ground and sobbed into his hands, repeating the same thing over and over. I fucking killed him. I killed him. My parents sat me down later and told me they were getting a divorce. The meeting was closely monitored, of course. The jail guards weren't going to let a kid near an alleged murderer alone, even if he was his son. I learned that apparently my mom had been having an affair with Mr. Welsh, one that lasted for years before my dad found out. He was devastated and confronted her a few days before the party. When she refused to leave Mr. Welsh and asked for a divorce, my dad took his rage out on the only thing he could think of, Mr. Welsh himself. He'd seen him talking and dancing with my mom at the party, and something inside him snapped. He asked Mr. Welsh down to the lake around the side of the house to look at the dock. When they were all alone, my father dragged him to the water. I still don't know how to feel about either of my parents. I was sent to live with my grandparents in another town as everything played out, and only saw them on supervised visits. I know I can't forgive my mom for what she did to my dad, but I also feel weird around my dad too, for the awful thing I saw him do. His anger was understandable, of course. It's what he did with it that makes me so unsettled. He's told me he still loves me a lot, and will be there for me when he gets out. I believe him. I just don't know if I'm ready to accept everything yet. Mr. Welsh's body was never recovered. My dad was convicted purely on circumstantial evidence. Some days I think of driving out to the old lake house where I grew up, and my innocence was lost, and looking out at that great expanse of water. Maybe one day Mr. Welsh will finally be found in that lake, or maybe he never will. I work summers as a camp counselor in northern parts of Ontario, Canada. On the date this particular incident occurred, I was camping with a group of 10-year-old boys on the same lake the summer camp was based on. Like a routine camping trip, we canoed out to the site and set up our tents. Me and my coworker Mike took turns supervising the kids while we swam, built forts, and played games. We cooked some food over the fire, sat around, and told stories, cooked s'mores, the typical Canadian camping experience. At around 9:30, I tell the kids it's time for bed, and they head off into their tents, which were positioned a small walk away from the shoreline, but still within line of sight from where we had the fire pit. Me and Mike were shooting the breeze by the water, smoking a cigarette, and basically just hanging out, before we decided to head into our own tent and call it a night. What happened next still troubles me to this day and remains my go-to scary campfire story. We were both gazing into the pitch-black night water when we saw a small light approaching us slowly, slightly above water level. We speculated what this could possibly be for a few moments before it came close enough for us to see. The light was mounted on the front of a kayak, and someone was approaching our campsite. Now, it's important to note that as a camp counselor, part of our training goes over how to deal with stranger encounters in an environment where we're responsible for a group of children on public property. I was prepared to give this mystery paddler the typical speech about how we were camping with a group from a recognized organization and we would respectfully ask they find another campsite. This person's appearance shook us to the bone, though, as the light drew nearer. Paddling this kayak was a woman who looked to be in her 60s. She had incredibly long wisps of gray hair that was trailing off into the water. Her skin looked like old leather, and her dead-looking eyes were tough to spot underneath all her wrinkles. She looked directly at me, and she spoke. I realized she was missing most of her teeth. "Oh, are all the children safe in bed?" she asked me, pointing in the direction of the tents, not really knowing how to respond, and quite frankly crapping myself. I responded by telling her we were fine, and she had to leave. "That's good. Just as expected for this time." She smiled and then turned her kayak and paddled off into the night. At this point in time, myself and Mike were legitimately very creeped out. Not only because the appearance of this mystery woman who resembled a corpse, but because of her inquiry on the whereabouts and safety of the children we had brought on this trip. Not knowing what else to do, we grabbed our hunting knives and sat by the fire after checking on the kids once more. A half hour later is where things really started to get creepy. Across the lake, a female counselor was leading another trip for kids the same age group. She sent me a text which read something along the lines of, "Hey Sean, stop screwing with us. This isn't funny. My kids are really creeped out." I instantly called her and let her know I had just seen someone near my campsite that seemed eerie and suspicious, and I was not trying to play any jokes. Apparently, one of their kids had opened their tent door to take a piss and seen a woman with long hair standing with her arms open toward them near the shoreline. I live in the countryside in an idyllic village where half the houses are vacation homes. Not much happens here, but if you enjoy nature, it's a pretty great place to live. I'm an outdoorsy kind of woman, with my favorite element being water. I do kayaking, diving, swimming, anything water-related I can get my hands on. I was on my way home from my night shift. I had this job just for one summer at a halfway house. It's a home for 8 recovering addicts, and there has to always be 2 people working there at night, just in case. It's usually very calm. We play cards, watch TV, cook. It's pretty easy money. Back on topic, I was driving home, and as I always do, I stopped at the little secluded lake for a swim. I can never resist a good swim, and always got a bikini in the car just in case. This lake isn't very large, but it is crystal clear and surrounded by a beautiful forest. You would never even know it was there if no one told you. The little road that leads down to the beach is fairly narrow and well hidden. As a result, there's almost never anyone there, aside from the occasional dog walker. I had only just started to swim out into the lake when I felt that my car key, which I kept tied onto a piece of string around my ankle, didn't feel quite tight enough. I was afraid it would slip off and be lost in the water. Instead of swimming straight out into the lake, I quickly made my way around a little rocky part of the headland. This area was slightly L-shaped. I was in the angled portion and could see through to the beach and the car as I fastened the string better. I just so happened to look up towards my car. My spot was slightly hidden, not far from the beach or the car, behind the corner of this area. As I watched the car, I didn't notice him at first. I had to really squint to make sure what I was seeing wasn't an illusion or a trick of my imagination. But as I looked closer, I saw that squatting behind my SUV was clearly a man. A man in a bright yellow hoodie. I didn't see his face, of course, and it was too far away to actually see who this was anyway, but I recognized this person's hoodie. This guy must be Creepy Freddy. He was only 17, but he was very unstable. He'd never returned from his visit to his parents the day before. We called the police, of course, but since he usually turns up on his own after a few days of freedom and drugs, the police often advise us to just wait and see. He'd earned his nickname of Creepy Freddy after assaulting a girl for no other reason than that he felt she was too beautiful. Thankfully, she hadn't been injured badly, but it was still extremely creepy. Indeed, he had a very long history of drug-induced violent outbursts. Even if he was nice enough when he was sober, he was a nightmare when he wasn't. I thought about trying to get up, leaving the car behind, and trying to walk towards the main road. But what if he spotted me and chased after me? I had no idea if he was in a fit state or not. I was also barefoot in my orange bikini. I would be very easy to spot. I decided against the risk of enduring a face-to-face encounter with a possibly drugged up and possibly armed Freddy. That was too big a risk. I considered my other options, and I realized there was only really one. To swim across the lake and reach the little cluster of vacation cottages that occupied the opposite beach. As quietly as I could, I started to swim over. The swim took me over 90 minutes. I kept turning around to see if I was being followed. When I reached the other beach, I was completely exhausted and cold. I walked up the sandy beach as a young mom and her kids spotted me. I explained the situation, and she phoned the police and fed me some scones and coffee, and the best waffles I ever had. The police arrived only to find Freddy gone. All 4 of my tires had been slashed. I resigned from my job at the halfway house where he stayed soon after, and Freddy is, as far as I know, still not found to this day. For some background, I've grown up in South Africa my entire life and live in a generally safe area. Any medical professionals in South Africa, i.e. doctors, physios, etc., have to complete a year of community service where the government places you in a most likely rural area where you're expected to work in a public facility and help around the community. Being a medical professional, I moved to another province, equivalent to a state, in South Africa for a year to complete my aforementioned service. I won't mention the specific area, but it's considered more rural than the regular South Africa city. Needless to say, having not lived there for very long, I wasn't always sure which hangout spots were considered safe and which ones you'd much rather avoid. Fast forward a few months into living in this new province, my boyfriend came to visit me. We drove around and noticed a huge park enclosed by a fence nearby. There were tons of families walking around in the grass, having barbecues, sitting on benches. We thought it looked like a pretty safe area. We chose a spot on a bench and sat down together to talk. My boyfriend still lived back home, so we were doing the distance thing. I was sad he was going to be leaving again in just 2 days, and started crying because of this. That actually is relevant later. He calmed me down and we sat looking at all the people walking around. Next thing we know, these 2 guys started walking from about 20 meters away, heading right for us. They looked extremely sketchy too. All mismatched clothes which were torn up, and they were doing the typical gangster walk. We thought they might just walk past us, but they literally walked straight up to us. Being from South Africa, my boyfriend and I both had an immensely bad feeling about the encounter soon to come. They approached us. We froze in place instead of getting up and walking away. One of the gangsters, clearly covered in gang tattoos, crouched down next to me, while the other one went around to my boyfriend and stood behind him. They asked us if we could help them out with some money because they'd just gotten out of jail yesterday. We said we didn't have any, but they were persistent and wouldn't leave us alone. I was starting to freak out at this point. I'd been robbed before, and I knew this persistent behavior could and eventually would escalate to violence. They told us they didn't exactly want to hurt us, but they needed the money and whatever else we had to give or else. My boyfriend realized this too, and took out his brand new phone in hopes that would make them leave us alone. They took the phone and glanced it over a few times. The brand was not common in South Africa, and because they couldn't recognize it, they said they didn't want this. They moved in closer, behind us, crouching down. We assumed that so the other people around us wouldn't see them. I tried to hide my car keys in my pocket. I was scared they'd try to take the car, as they kept looking over at me. I didn't know what to do, and I was feeling overwhelmed, so I just started crying. I lied and told these gangsters that we just found out my boyfriend's dad passed away. Could they not see we were very upset? There was no way we'd be able to make it to his funeral if they took all our stuff from us. Luckily, as I said before, I had already been crying beforehand when they arrived, so it didn't seem like a lie at all. The one on my boyfriend's side's demeanor immediately changed. He apologized and gave his condolences. I was very surprised at this. The other gangster crouching beside me didn't seem to care though. He reached into his pocket. At this point, I was very sure something bad was about to happen. Likely he would pull out a knife on me. I grabbed my boyfriend's hand and we tried to run away. They just stood there watching us and luckily didn't try to chase after. I guess they decided there were too many people around. For anyone wondering, South Africa's crime rate is extremely high, one of the highest in the world. And while most areas are safe, you can never escape running into situations like this. For anyone thinking we may have been prejudiced because they didn't technically do anything, I can promise you, when you see a South African gangster, you will know. They're known for being cold and ruthless, so I'm glad we made it out of there unharmed physically. I don't want to know what would have happened if we didn't get out when we did, or if they hadn't believed my lie. This story stretches over a couple of years, starting in my junior year of high school. I was a very sad teenager. My dad had recently declared he didn't love my mom anymore, and my parents had been fighting non-stop. My father became completely distant at the most crucial point of my development, so as a result I developed attention issues. It was one of those usual, my dad doesn't pay attention to me, so I wanted everyone else to do that sort of things. Not going to lie, I wouldn't go as far as to blame myself for this situation because I was a minor, but I can't say I didn't want it when it first started. We met online like it usually happens. He was attractive, very smart, a college student. He told me he was 20. I'm not sure if that's true or not, because apparently he told me a fake name also. I had turned 17 that summer. It was nearing March of my junior year, and we hit it off immediately. I liked him a lot actually, so nearly a week after us talking, we decided to meet up. He lived a couple of hours away from me, which he drove all the way through traffic just to meet me at school. That sounded sweet to me at the time, but now it just raises major red flags. I didn't really think much of our age difference, because I was almost legal anyway, and I also thought of myself as very mature. It didn't bother me that this man was already almost out of college. He picked me up from school in his Prius. We hugged and decided to go to the mall to just hang out a bit. It was nearing sunset at this point. He bought me some ice cream and everything had gone pretty nicely. Everything changed when we went to his car though. He drove out to the empty side of the mall parking lot and asked if I wanted to make out in the back. I said sure, thinking it was no big deal. So we began kissing and I was really feeling it, you know. I was a horny teenager, I mean, what else would I be doing? Then though, something strange began to happen. He stopped in the middle and said, "Can I bite you?" I was taken aback for a moment. I was like, "What do you mean by bite?" "I don't know," he said. "I just get so turned on by pain. I love seeing people suffering." I was like, maybe he's into BDSM or something. I thought it was really strange, but maybe he just worded it poorly or something. Also, I didn't really want to be bitten though. A certain fear began to settle in. I felt nervous. I realized we were all alone, and this dude had just said something super unsettling. It was getting dark outside as well, and the doors were all locked. I felt myself backed into a corner. I legit thought to myself, if I say no, will he hurt me? I decided to say yes with much hesitation, but tried not to show it. I said he could bite me on the arm, but to stop when I said so. He said he would try, but no promises because he couldn't control himself. I was terrified. The man bit me so hard it looked like a zombie bite from one of those TV shows. He bit me right on the center of my forearm. It was dark purple, and he left teeth prints in my skin. I couldn't handle him biting me for such a long time, so I screamed in pain, at which point he removed his jaws from my arm, and it started to bleed. After that, he took me home. I was alarmed, but I just couldn't stop talking to him. I still talked with him for weeks after. He started to tell me all types of alarming information about him. He talked about being together and running away with each other because our parents wouldn't understand. He was a Muslim and I was a Christian. He got so weird though that we stopped talking for a while. He began to follow me on all my social media. I decided I wanted to block him after I realized just how toxic he was. There wasn't any particular occurrence as to which I stopped, or a final red flag. Basically, my best friend just talked some sense into me and bullied me into breaking it off with him. She was the smart one of us two, definitely. She convinced me he was a creep, and I agreed with her. I felt an immense amount of guilt. I pretty much forgot about him until my freshman year of college. What I hadn't been aware of this entire time, though, was he'd made a fake account to follow me on Twitter. I had already been in a relationship for about a year, and this one time, without even thinking about it, I decided to post a kind of racy picture on Twitter. I was 20 at this time. After a few minutes, I received a DM from a person I didn't know. I was like, who could this be? I could tell immediately it was him. The message read, "I finally got to see those beautiful Slav boobs of yours." I was grossed out to say the least. My boyfriend was all questions because I'd completely forgotten about this guy up until that moment. It still doesn't end there though. Fast forward a couple of weeks. I'm walking on my university campus, and guess who I see there, just sitting down on a random bench? Yeah, you guessed it. I was so done with this. Are you serious? The universe just seemed to want to fuck with me. He looked up with me and made eye contact, after which I received another Twitter message. I didn't even bother reading it. I thought I had blocked him on everything, but the fact we still somehow ended up attending the same university gave me chills. It's not that I knew he would do something to me, because I don't really know if I can say for sure he would. The unsettling fear was still there though. I was intensely paranoid. It all just seemed too convenient that he was going to the same college as me, years after he was supposed to have graduated. We'd talked about going to this university because he wanted to transfer, but he said he probably wouldn't because the drive was too far away from where he lived. And then seeing him there after he mentioned not wanting to attend it, it felt kind of crazy. The timing was just too good. After that, I saw him again several times, though I don't think he'd noticed I was there. I'd completely changed the way I looked by then, dyed and cut my hair, switched to contact lenses instead of glasses. I hope he just didn't recognize me or stop paying attention, maybe even graduated. I'm not sure if this is as crazy as some other stories you've heard, but I definitely don't want to see that guy ever again. I used to work at Borders way back when, though I had another job at the mall as well. Something about being at the bookstore, though, made me much more recognizable, I guess. I often had people approach me when I was on the street, or ask me about the store's sales while I was at a drive-thru window. It was mostly harmless stuff, though I did get some creeps on occasion. At the time, I had a dating profile up, but I had to take it down. I'd started getting really weird messages from people saying they'd seen me at the grocery store or something. Just really bizarre crap. The killing blow that finally made me close it, however, came shortly before my 19th birthday. I was checking my account after work, and I see a message titled, "We've met," which really creeped me out immediately. I clicked on it, and it said, "Sort of." It proceeded to go into this very weird graphic depiction of this guy who was apparently so thrilled by my cashiering skills that I caused a stirring in his loins while checking him out. This email was seriously like 3 pages long, all talking about how sexually excited he was and all the things he wanted to do to my young body. It was in great detail. I was horrified to think that while I was just doing my job, one of my customers had been looking at me like that, thinking all these horrible things. I clicked on the profile, only to find there was no photo. It said he was 56 and single, but no other information. I needed to know what this guy looked like, which is the only reason I replied. I imagined that had been his game all along. I didn't respond to any of the other things he said, but I asked him if he'd send me a photo. He told me he couldn't do so because he was some sort of public figure. He told me he'd email it to me instead. It took him 2 days to get back to me. Those were 2 very long days. While I waited, I looked at my message history and discovered that this guy had actually written me many times. I just always ignored him because he had no pictures and was out of the age group I was looking for. Out of morbid curiosity, I looked through all these messages. All of them were of him seeing me at random places, describing the thoughts of sexually graphic things he wanted to do to me. He talked about fantasies of using me with another man he knew, raping me, tying me up. Many of the details were specific to me alone, which led me to believe he wasn't just mass sending these out to every young woman on the site. They were specifically about me. Meanwhile, this guy was older than my dad. I spent the next 2 days tensing around every older man who came in. I was afraid to be friendly with any of them. I was in fear that one of them would be this guy, and he'd take it as a go-ahead to come at me. I was having my birthday celebration, the day he finally got back to me. The moment I saw his name, I got a bad feeling in my gut. I couldn't immediately place it, but I knew there was something wrong with this person in particular writing these things to me. I stared at it for a moment, positive I knew this guy from somewhere. My brain just refused to click for some reason. I texted my friend to confirm with her as it began to dawn on me. This man had been my high school principal. I was horrified. I was still 18 at the time, which meant he must have been creeping on a bunch of us all along. I remembered many times of being alone with him in his office, and it made me feel queasy. Was he just perched there waiting for us girls to graduate so he could legally pounce on us? I wrote him back and told him, I don't know if you remember me, but you were my high school principal, and I happen to know you're married. He didn't reply. I thought that would be the end of it. I was still super creeped out for a while after that, though, just knowing how long he'd been thinking about me and sending me these graphic messages. He'd been an authority figure in my formative years. Almost a year passed without further incident. He didn't come in when I was there. One day, I was ringing someone up without having gotten a good look at his face though. It was a friendly exchange, right up until I made eye contact. It was him again, grinning at me. I put his stuff in his bag and turned away from the register, but he stayed where he was. I pretended to organize some returns, but he just kept standing there, silently, not moving or saying anything. I knew he was watching me, but I couldn't bear to look. The moment lasted far too long. Finally, I grabbed my headset and asked a manager to come to the front of the store. He ran out after that, and I never saw him again. This first started when I went to a summer camp in my junior year of high school. I met this girl, whose name was Mar. I introduced myself to Mar. Then, for the rest of the 6 weeks, I talked to her probably a grand total of 3 times, which includes my introduction, the time she locked me and my friend in a room, and when I said goodbye when the camp ended. She seemed really nice, and I thought she was extremely sweet. Fast forward a year, I get a text out of nowhere saying, "Hey, I missed you. It's me, Mar." We continued to text, catching up on our lives. At the time, I thought this was fairly normal, as I'd usually get texts from people at that camp trying to catch up, and it was really nice hearing where they were in life. About 9 texts in, after catching up on everything, she suddenly asked me, "Would you go to prom with me?" I dismissed the strangeness because I thought she was probably desperate to get a date for prom. I was about an hour drive away, and that was a good distance. She let me know the date of her prom, which I realized was the day after my own, and the day before one of my concerts of an orchestra I was in at the time. I let her know of the complicated situation, but she continued to try and convince me to go with her. Every day, she texted me many times asking if I could go, saying that I had time, that I should do it for her. I said yes in the end. I felt like she really wanted a date to prom for the experience, so I thought, why not? I would want the same if I was in her situation. What could go wrong? 3 days later, I'm playing some games on my PC at the time, when I hear my older sister yell the darndest thing from downstairs. "Your girl is here!" Confused, I go to the window of my room, and what do you know? Mar is standing in my driveway, smiling and waving at me. Now, most people might have thought, oh my god, how did she find my address? How did she know I wasn't doing anything right now? What the fuck? Instead, my dumbass instantly thought, oh shit, she drove an hour to get here. I feel kind of bad. I headed outside to meet her and ask her why she was here. The first thing she said to me was, I drove an hour to get here, so you should take me out on a date. Behind me was my dad, approvingly shaking his head. Before I could even reply, he told me to go. He had such a proud look on his face. That's when I realized this situation might be kind of bad. I took her out to a Chinese restaurant and decided to order 3 plates of food all by myself. I realized that if I could keep eating, I could decrease the time I had to talk, as I'd be chewing 75% of it. To start off, she told me stories about all the guys she'd ever went after, who were taken by people she knew. She got increasingly mad, as she kept talking to the point where people around us started to look. She suddenly asked me about my relationship with a girl I'd had a thing with a few months back. In my head, I again thought this was fine. She probably knew about that girl because she was friends with her friends, and they probably told her about it. I explained my situation about how I don't talk to that girl anymore. Mar suddenly gets this flare in her eye. She asked me what I planned to do with the time until college, and if I was interested in dating. I told her I didn't really have any particular plans. After a few more places we go to, because she said she wouldn't leave until she was satisfied with her time with me, I went back home, and we decided to play games on my Wii. After a solid game of Super Smash Bros. Brawl, she realized I was not having much fun. I guess you're kicking me out then. She proceeded to try and kiss me. Out of panic, I put my entire right hand on her face and pushed her away. I led her out of my house and to her car. Once she got in, she started to take pictures of me on her Snapchat with the caption, "First date." I told my parents about the situation, and I swear to God, they literally brushed it off right away. "Oh, people can be like that. You should be happy a girl likes you." My sister, though, started to figure out that maybe this was not good. She agreed with my parents, though, because she thought it would be funny to see how this all went. 2 weeks later of dodging all her texts of her asking to come over again, I'm heading to her pre-prom party. I was completely exhausted, to the point where I couldn't even run. I was not ready for another prom. Surprisingly though, the pre-prom party and the prom itself was a lot of fun. She didn't do anything that made me feel uncomfortable, and her friends were amazing. After the prom, she took me back to her friend's house. She then asked if I could stay the night, which I couldn't due to my concert the day after. She started to get very angry with me, so I texted my sister to help me. For the first time ever, she came to my rescue. An hour later, as Mar was getting increasingly furious with me, I got a call from my sister saying she was outside. I let Mar know and ran out of the house, relieved my day of prom with her was now over. A few months later, I got an anonymous letter in the mail addressed to me. Inside were 3 whole pages, filled the front to back with a declaration of love from Mar. It explained how she fell in love with me at first sight, how everything I did made her love me so much more. She couldn't live without me anymore. I met up with a friend a few days later, and he showed me all these Snapchat conversations with her. Just walls of texts, questions asking personal things about me. For the next year while I was in college, I would get random texts and Snapchats from her, showing pictures of her coming to my town and asking where I was. There were times she would go to my town's high school games and send pictures of our coaches with their jackets and the name of my town on there. Eventually, she stopped messaging me because I blocked her on everything, but I don't know if that means she stopped following me at all. What is up guys, Blue Spooky here. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any feedback for me as well, be sure to leave that in comments below the video. If you guys have a story you'd like to send in, or if you'd like to contact me for any reasons, there will be links to my social media in the description below the video, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has one, and how you'd like to be credited in the description below the video. Please make sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with and try to use as much proper grammar as possible to make sure you have the highest chance of appearing in a future video. Overall, I think that's pretty much it for now guys, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.